Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of Spectrum and the Web3. So in today's session, we will be talking about risk management in Web3. I'm Sean, your host for today's session. I'm honored here to represent our event partners like Spectrum, Pinnacle Learning, Swish, and our esteemed community partner, XLab Digital. So let me start by sharing a bit about us. Spectrum here is a community-designed platform to bring people together, to build genuine connections, network, and access to great learning opportunities. Pinnacle Learning is a place that focuses on impact-driven and future-focused learning programs for entrepreneurs. Swish here is our online digital business community app that draws insightful connections through events and interest groups. And also, XLab Digital, a subsidiary of Ananda Development, is a venture builder that co-ventures with industry leaders to identify digital opportunities. So as part of our giveaway alert, the Golden Equator team here with Swish are giving a special giveaway for our attendees today. So if you sign up for the Swish app and complete our post-event feedback form, you will be eligible for a Taka voucher giveaway. So make sure you take advantage of this opportunity. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to focus on risk management in Web3, a very important topic for companies as we move into a more decentralized, intelligent, and connected environment. So Andeed here will be our speaker, and he's a well-respected cloud business and risk management leader with over 15 years of experience in major technology companies such as ServiceNow, Avanti, and ByteDance. He's currently serving as the president of the Risk Insurance Management Association of Singapore, and we'll be discussing two things for you. One, the risk your organization will face in this new era, including cybersecurity, reputational risk, regulatory, and technology risk. And also the more important thing for all of you to share strategies on mitigating these risks, including robust cybersecurity protocols, managing a company's reputation, and staying compliant with laws. So we're honored to have Andeed as our speaker today, and I'm sure we'll draw great insights and expertise from him. So without further ado, over to you, Andeed.
Thank you so much, Sean. So maybe let me just do a quick share of my deck. So I prepared a deck for everyone. I think, again, traditionally, probably most of you guys have heard a lot about Web3, blockchain, etc. And typically this topic, it can be very technical, right? But rest assured today, I'm coming in with a little bit, I think less technical, right? I can't avoid some of the technicality, but I'll explain as much as I could to the level of business so that you all can actually take away some useful insights, right? To help you to better manage or embrace the opportunity that is coming for this topic on Web3, right? So again, my name is Andeed. I am running a non-profit association, which is called RIMAS, right? And Sean has kindly introduced. So I also like to basically share with some of the folks here about what RIMAS does before I embark onto today's topic, right? So essentially, we are a non-profit organization founded in 1988, right? So yes, we are about 33 years old this year. And we have dedicated our expertise, our passion into advancing the principle and the practice of risk management. So if we talk about risk management, back in the early days before Singapore is independent, right? There were a lot of civil riots. There were a lot of instability among the society, right? So those were the risks that we talk about, right? But today, risks are very different. Right, and exactly why today we are embarking on this Web3 discussion. So we believe that everyone is a risk manager, right? That is our tagline, and we strive to lead and promote risk management in industry, in commerce, with government and community like Swish, and we also have formed up 12 very forward-looking risk chapters, essentially focusing on pertinent topics that are risks that is going to happen in the next maybe 30 to 50 years. So risk managers are forward-looking, right? We look at things 50 years time, and we start to manage it now, right? And this child forward-looking chapter includes some of this blockchain risk management, right? And we work with association and our academic partners, and also form country-level chapters, right? To basically come together to continue to promote these efforts that we have established since 1988. All right, so I hope this has give you guys some insights into who we are as RIMAS. And now today's topic is really around this very mystical thing about Web3, right? So again, there's a lot of different definition, and people have come in from different walks of life, talking about what blockchain is, what Web3 is. Some even talk about Web3 is just a platform for transactions of cryptocurrency, right? So there's so many different definitions. So I hope to basically set a tone for today, what blockchain is, right? So that you can actually take along this definition and also appreciate the risk management sharing that I'll be giving to you this morning. All right. So I think first and foremost, we want to talk about when we are using things like internet, right? What are we transacting, right? So if you are health services, you might be transacting healthcare data, right? So for example, you receiving your height and weight through an app, right? That is a kind of transaction. If you talk about insurance, right? It could be you increasing your premium because you're about to travel to a high-risk country, right? And of course, on a day-to-day basis, we buy food, clothes, and travel, right? All these are transactions that are already happening on, many people call it the Web 2.0, right? Which is the internet space. And essentially, this is owned by a few players when we talk about Web 2.0. And in Web 3.0, there's a term called the public blockchain, right? Where we talk about this type of database would be now having, for example, Bitcoin, right, as a way of transacting, for a service. And this is probably what you have heard as the foundation, potential future version of internet, right? And Web3 is also known as what we call a semantic web, right? So maybe to define what is a semantic web, you can read something, you can edit something, you can execute something. So I'm talking about you, right? So in the era moving forward, user has more control over how they would like their data to be consumed or to be interacted. And therefore, you realize that in Web3, there's a huge emphasis of or huge involvement of things like artificial intelligence, right? Especially machine learning, which enables, say, computer to analyze data in a very massive way, right? That human can do, but you probably need a lot of human and a collective intelligence to generate and distribute the kind of contents, right? Someone needs. Let's talk about like ChatGPT, right? So how can you be able to generate a topic that requires maybe 3 groups of community, right? And in 3 seconds, right? So through a prompt, right? So that is the kind of indicators of how Web3 is evolving in this space. I'm not saying that ChatGPT is a Web3 yet, right? I'm just sharing with everyone that there is that evolution that's happening. And it's appealing because it has the concept of decentralization, right? As Sean has mentioned. And I kind of put that chart, the graphical charts on the right side. If you can see, the difference between the left and right is that you could see that there is a very IP-driven, backbone, right? Where each of the individual nodes, right, or machines or server now is not centralized to one control, right? So there isn't something what we call a single point of failure in the blockchain world, right? Or eventually in the Web3 world, right? So, what is a blockchain and a Web3? Probably some of you guys would think. Now, think about blockchain as a piece of technology, right? While Web3, so the technology could be the one that is sitting in the center, in the blue area, this part, right? So while Web3 is the collective interactions, right, of all these blockchain technologies to offer users the benefit they need. All right. So what this means now is that customer can access internet through blockchain, right, and interact like how they are interacting on Web2, but getting a lot more ownerships and control, right? While this is pretty exciting, it also creates a whole realm of risk altogether. And when I say risk, I'm basically indicating potentially negative impacts, right? So later on, I will discuss a little bit more on this picture, right? So let me move on. So what are the kind of characteristics of Web3? Some of you guys might be asking. So in the industry, we are talking about the term permission, trust, right? So typically it's permissionless, it's trustless, right? So you do not need to have a set of permission to basically have someone to do something, because you are the one who is controlling and owning, right? And this also implies that central authorities cannot have that single point of control and have access to what services you are consuming, right, or others are consuming, right? So you also don't need an intermediary anymore, right? People are talking about you don't need a bank, right? And therefore there are very, very prominent startups that are forming what they call decentralized finance, or DeFi, where there are components of financial transactions or instruments that have been decentralized, right, in the Web3 world. And they help to execute some of these real-world financial transactions on the blockchain without the help of, for example, a bank or the government, right? So this is something that is happening, especially in countries like India or even in Philippines, right, where they are not starting from a high income or middle income kind of space, but these are people who are desperately needing to survive, needing to earn some money, right, needing to have a way to be offering their services for some values, right? So you realize that the beginning of DeFi actually starts with some of the more lower income and the needed society, right? So in theory, Web3 preserve also user privacy better, right? Because organization and the intermediaries are really conducting some of the data collections these days, right? With the pure reasons of offering you a better service, right? But is that true, right? So again, these are some of the characteristics I hope to share. Again, there are much more, but in view of the time, I hope to just focus on these three and have it as a main discussion for today. Now, why do you need Web3 exactly, right? So I think this slides really talks a lot about the progression of where we are now into Web3, right? Some people are saying that we are in Web 2.5. It's taking place gradually, right? Again, without much public awareness, interestingly, right? So if you have not attended today's session, you may not know that actually some of the things that you are doing, that you are using, are actually already moving towards a decentralized model, right? But again, there are always two groups in the Web3 world, right? There's a group that always says that you have to centralize first before you decentralize, right? They are what they call the leftists, right? So the left wing and the right wing. So the left wing people are usually more towards the central authority, right? So you can see that players like MAS is creating their own cryptocurrency, their own projects, right? And on the right wings, right, these are people who strongly believe that you start off in a decentralized manner, right? So at the web layer, everyone is decentralized. Data are not stored in a centralized storage server, but is stored in individual personal computer. Now, can you recall, ladies and gentlemen, that's like 20 years ago, or even later, we were in a decentralized stage. right? So for those who are in Singapore, apologies if we have any foreigners. We always go to this building complex called Sim Lim Square, right? So Sim Lim Square was a hot place where people will buy what we call a CPU, right? And people will buy a lot of storage, hard disk, etc. Right? That was a era of actually decentralization, right? Where a lot of the data that users are consuming are owned by them. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So it was more like a Web1 kind of era, right? So essentially we are sort of reversing the way of doing to Web1, but yet we are enforcing a lot more privacy and security that's happening beyond Web2, right? The combination of the two, right? And essentially, you realize that before you could decentralize, you still need to centralize. Why? Because you still need things like internet. If not, your Web3 may not work. Yes, of course, there are people who talks about off-chain, right? But you still need what we call the basic infrastructure, such as telecommunication. So telcos are the ones that might centralize, the blockchain infrastructure. So if you do not have players like AWS or Google, you still essentially still have telcos, your Singtel, your StarHub, etc., and many others, your AT&T, right, and your Horizon. So all these are still players that needs to centralize and offer you resources that you can sustain Web3. Right. So again, I hope this gives you guys a very good idea right now that why there's these two wings and that perhaps we can reach a middle ground sometime. So Web2 has traditionally been a more community focused development, right? And you realize that Web3 is radically changed to become more back-end focused, right? And it is empowering individuals, right? And it focuses a lot on trust, security, and privacy, because it's you who is now responsible, for the data that you're holding on, that you're giving out, that you're taking and using. All right. While Web2 back then was just about end user experience. This morning I just saw two grannies who were using Facebook. Can you see some of the late adopters, right? It has caught up. So we always say that when the elderlies are catching out on some of the technology, right, that we are using as a young adult or kids, right, then we are observing some indications of the next progression coming, right? So that's something very interesting to share real time. And of course, the type of application here, as I mentioned, involve for Web3 more smart applications like ML and AI based technology. I did mention an example like ChatGPT. All right. So you will be seeing a lot more ChatGPT that is going to be producing use cases that is going to empower individual user in the future. In fact, I'm actually working on a book right now. So, hopefully in the future, I can work with Switch again to share with you guys more about what is entailed within the book. And for Web2, it was still very web application based, right? So for those who are still using, say, WordPress, if you're using Wix.com, to build your website, you're creating apps on your mobile phone. These are all very web application based applications, right? Now, we move down to the fourth item, which is data, right? So again, data is really about the network owns the data when we are in Web 2, whereas in Web 3, the ownership lies within you, right? So that's the difference. I also want to talk about technologies that are driving Web 3 and Web 2. In the Web 2 world, it's a lot of front-end scripting, right? So for those who do not know some of these Ajax, JavaScripts, right? And HTML5, CSS3, these are all programmers who call it the front-end scripts. There are also back-end scripts that people use, like like text scripts and many others, right? So But Web3, you are no longer talking about script level. You're talking about algorithms level, right? You're talking about how algorithms are actually learning, evolving, self-healing, right? And happening within each decentralized protocols. So essentially, you have heard that there are different types of blockchain. And the difference between blockchain and web application is web application focuses a lot more on the internet protocols that you're familiar with, like HTTPS, etc. But in Web3, there is a very strong focus on the protocol layer, right? Which I don't want to go too deep, right? Because it can get technical. But essentially, each protocol layer for each L1 or L2 chain, they rely on different types of scripts, and to put together to run some of the protocols. All right. And of course, finally, you realize that in terms of commercialization, Web2 focuses a lot on interactive advertisement, like advertisements that is happening on Facebook, that you are seeing in TikTok, etc. While Web3 is a lot more real time. It's behavioral advertising, right? So you might inherently purchase something based on the behavior that you're having on that day, at that hour, within that minute, right? So that's the kind of experience you might be anticipating in the future. And there's a huge emphasis on the use of 3D graphics, which is pretty lack in Web 2. You could only pretty much find that in gamings, when you're playing a game in the Web 2 world. But Web 3 would have a lot of interactions with virtual reality, with augmented reality. Now imagine a world where you hold up your phone. So I just create some scenarios to help you to visualize better. You hold out a phone, you project Andeed, and you urgently wants to ask Andeed a question, right? And interestingly, that Andeed is somewhere in the world, right? Who is also experiencing something that can address your question. And he decided to accept that call, and you stand face to face with him, real time, right? So that's sort of the kind of behavioral advertising scenario that might happen. Of course, you would have seen people trying to do, like an avatar, right? Trying to serve you using avatars, right? So those are trends that are evolving towards how Web3 could look like, right? So why do I share with you guys some of these 7 points today? Because your business may begin focusing on use cases based on these 7 areas. And essentially, these 7 areas will give rise to some of the risk that you need to identify. All right. And again, don't forget Web3 has many different types of hardware and applications that needs to be involved, right? And it will help to enhance how you work and how you play, right, in the very near future. So with that, I hope the 7 areas has got everyone into a box, right, to start focusing on this mystical concept of Web3. Like I say, actually, I always tell people that there's not much difference in terms of experience right now when you are looking at Web 2 and Web 3, right? Because we are in the midway. But I'm sure some of you guys would have experienced something very different when you were interacting with technologies like ChatGPT, right? Or DALL-E, right? Or even hearing the sentient debates on Lambda, right? Those are indicators of how Web3 might look like in the future, right? Because there's a heavy emphasis of the use of AI in interacting with Web 2 and giving power back to you. Now, then now, what would that present as a problem or a risk to my business or to me as an individual if I want to capture that? And I'm very delighted to basically tell you guys there is a solution, right? So again, RIMAS also has technical committees that participated in the ISO 31000. This is actually a risk management ISO. We have consensus globally. Not everyone agrees, of course. That's why I use the word consensus. And essentially, actually, ISO is like is following somewhat like blockchain idea, but okay, let's not go down that route. But risk management here refers to coordinated activities to direct and control organizations with regards to risk. Organization here refers to you, your business, right? So, or a group of people. So your ability to discern on how your business principle should evolve, right? And translate that into what we call risk principles, all right? So every company has a North Star. You have a direction that you have given to your employees, right? So how do you translate that into what we call risk principles, right? And risk principles are very dynamic. They have also very comprehensive in the sense through the frameworks that you're going to build, right? So essentially, risk principles forms the foothold to the various types of frameworks, or what we call risk frameworks, that will be developed by your organization and your leadership team. And this framework will then need to be cascaded down to your executive team to help them to build processes, right, to manage the inherent risk as much as they could, right? So for those who do not know what inherent risk means, this is the maximum risk that any organization will be exposed to. So in the context of Web3, what is the maximum risk that your organization will be exposed to? It could be bankruptcy, right? It could be losing $300 million, right? And what causes the loss of the 300 million, right? That's something you start to then discuss internally. And there is one point in time where you say, Andeed, but seems that not every risk we can manage. We can at most manage up to 283 million, right? So we are still left with 7 million that we just couldn't manage. What are these kind of risks? So those leftover risks that you have no control over, for example, a flood in Singapore that damages your assets, right? Would you know that tomorrow there will be a flood? Yeah. So these are some of the residual risks that will leave you to basically transfer this risk to, for example, purchasing and insurance. All right. So these are all what we call risk treatments, and it comes with robust risk assessment, right, to identify this sort of residual risk, right, and for you to then determine what kind of risk treatment to adopt, right? So there are also risk treatment where company says that we are ready to lose the 7 million, and that is to accept the risk rather than buy an insurance, because you would have evaluated that losing the 7 million actually has a lower impact and lower likelihood, and therefore you decided to accept it. All right. So yeah. So again, I hope give you guys some kind of context to how risk management works. Again, I love to continue to engage even after this session to help you guys to build out some of these initial concepts as well. Now, Andeed, so what are some of the areas of risk that are arising from Web3? You know, we are very excited. We have to embark onto that. So if you all remember just now, I mentioned about the 7 areas. These are the 7 areas that you can start off, right, as a framework for you to build the risk principles. And I would like to help everyone to understand risk principles here refers to your appetite to risk, right? So in the buffet, how much do you want to eat, right? So some of you guys may want to try to eat all as a sample, right? And then subsequently focus on a particular group of food and go all in on it, right? So that's the kind of risk appetite, right, that you would need to do in the Web3 world, right? So how much do I want to empower individual user, right? What level of trust, security, and privacy do I want to enforce or give, right? What kind of AI and machine learning application that is relevant to my business, right? So who or what entity should have ownership over the data, right? Including the use of the data, right? And also, what kind of protocols do we want to embark on? What kind of behaviors do we want to observe? How much visualization do we want to put into our business? So, ladies and gentlemen, what I walk you through is just a very simple exercise of how I ask series of questions to determine the appetite of the risk that you want to be exposed to. Now, once you know the kind of appetite, obviously the next step is to ask yourself, what is the tolerance you have? So this is about managing risk already. And that's usually when you bring in a team of consultants to help you to plan, and then your team will coordinate, right, and do the communication, and you continuously improve record and reports, right, on how far are you deviating from the tolerance, right? So tolerance is actually a deviation away from your appetite. So you can see these two are linked essentially, right? So once you have understood your risk principle, the tolerance level, then we move on to continuous activity, right? And this is essential in risk management. So in the world of Web3, it's not about setting it once and you forget about it. There's no such thing. As you can see, technology keeps evolving. In fact, Google this morning just announced they creating their own ChatGPT related products, right, to compete against the player. So you can see by having news like this, it has kind of changed your risk profile, right? So risk governance really talks a lot about continuous activities. Activities of what ended? Activities of mapping new threats, right, or new opportunities. Measure them, put in resources to manage them, right, and do a balancing of that risk that you are going to take into the space of Web3, right? So there are also what we call agile risk management, where it is where top-down and bottom-up risk planning is done in tandem, right? And remember, individuals are learning and evolving. So if you want to basically always do a top-down, right, there's a higher chance that you are not getting feedbacks from the ground to change the risk principle that has probably outdated, right? So a Web3 principle may have outdated because new technology has evolved, right? Now, and can we always capture all the risk? The answer is no, right? But you can always begin with, like what I mentioned, this table here, through asking what could go wrong when we are empowering individual user, right? When we are giving X% of trust, security, and privacy to the user, what can go wrong, right? So this is really what risk-based thinking is all about. All right. So I hope so far so good. These are some of the steps, areas of risk. And let's talk a little bit about what could go wrong, really, right? So the evolution of Web 1 all the way to now, or even people are projecting Web 5, Web 4, right? So I would say we are pretty much at this level, right? And the very prominent threats that we are facing are obviously cyber assaults and data breaches. Then you'll be wondering, hey, and isn't that a Web 2 problem? I have to share with everyone, as we get more linked up, right? As we get more decentralized, the surface of attack gets larger, right? So even when we are in the stage of a Web 2.5, the kind of cybersecurity threat has not really reduced. In fact, it's going to be even more prominent in the new future. And that's the reason why scholars and philosophers are putting a priority on the trust, privacy, and security, right, in the Web3 space. Now, reputation risk is something that is ongoing, right? But it gets a lot more prominent in the more open and decentralized settings. Why? Because you can't control what individual wants to disseminate information about your company, for instance. And information like this could be a lot harder to manage because this time around is not centralized. All right. So, for example, you can sue, for example, Facebook or Meta right now, right? Or you can sue TikTok, right, for defaming your company on certain things. But when it goes down to individual, you may not even know who is defaming you. And that is something that reputation risk gets under the limelight, right? Now, we also talk about regulatory risk. New rules are still in the midst of creating, right? You notice that even Singapore government is still in the midst of developing this regulation. But first, they are building and trying out, right, and learning. So they are building, measuring, and learning through some of the minimum viable products or minimum viable policies, right, that they are creating as they are experimenting. So the regulatory risk itself right now may not be as high, but as it gets a lot clearer, there is definitely regulatory risk to organizations who do not abide to it. All right. And last but not least, of course, we talk about technology risk. Web3 itself is an ecosystem full of technology, cutting edge technology. We are not talking about just a simple website anymore. We are talking about a website probably that could talk to you, right? A website that could know more things than you. A website that could surprise you, right? And this creates a lot of potential danger, as well as glitches, right? That allows perpetrators to take advantage of, right? So I hope these 4 points again, there are more things that could go wrong, but here are really 4 of the highest priority areas that I think businesses should start to participate, not really sit and wait. You can participate, contribute to the community. In the Web3 world, it's a lot more collective, a lot more collaborative, right, than in the Web2 world where it is more consuming, right, where someone is trying to put out a video, a YouTube video, etc., for someone else to consume so that they can monetize. But in the Web3 world, it's a lot more collaborative and collective. The wisdom that is collected helps to shape and build Web3, right? So that's the kind of culture as well, right, for those who are unfamiliar with the culture of Web3. I would like to share one concept here. And this concept exists in Web2 as well, but it's going to become even more prominent in the Web3 world. It's what we call the zero trust initiatives, right? So start with zero trust to anyone, to any system, man or machine, right? Security first approach has always been one of the key approach that companies should adopt, right, when looking at Web3. You should also think about now. I'm not too sure whether audience can answer questions. Actually, I love to have interactions, but I actually had a question I want to ask is, can you see the difference between these two? One is the decentralized and the centralized. And if you recall, I mentioned that the surface area increase when you get decentralized. Can you look at the kind of web as compared to the number of lines here, right? So even though there's a single point of failure when the centralized controller is being attacked, but now if you take a look at each of these web, right? Now each of these devices becomes the centralized control because you have decentralized them. If this is a problem, won't you agree that the problem has been magnified? Right? And what is the problem? The problem is the access problem. Who can access to someone? Who can access to a machine? Who can access to the data, right? So I strongly encourage everyone to reinforce this concept of least privilege control, right? Which is when you get started with a machine or with a person, you will give them the lowest privilege and subsequently only assign privilege based on organization needs, group needs, job scope needs, right? So you can see here example of some of the policy people implement, right? They implement on people through identity, all right, or these days we call it the passwordless authentication capabilities, right? Of course, you have heard multi-factors authentication. Your 6-digit password that will be sent to your mobile phone, the password that you can type in, that is in the Web 2 world, right? So in the Web 3 world, what passwordless authentication could mean is you are you, right? I am Andeed, and we have Sean, right? Andeed needs to access into Sean material or need to call Sean. Sean needs to approve. And for Sean to approve, Sean needs to be present. And that doesn't need any password, right? So you can imagine, I'm just simplifying things to help people to understand. And that can apply into devices, that can apply into data extraction, access into application, or even managing some of the infrastructure and networks, right? So this zero trust initiatives is one of the biggest conversation. Even in the Web3 world, we're also talking about zero knowledge initiatives, right? So these are some of the very key discussion and theories, research that people are embarking on. Example of a cybersecurity threat for those who are wondering, hey, and a lot of theories, any examples, right? So here I would like to start off with the very first example. This example came from a former hacker, all right, who reveals that there are new avenues to attack. So he used to work as a hacker, right? He's a white hat, but he has since gone into becoming a security pro, right? And he reviews some of the security weaknesses of Web3. And Web3 has introduced this, what you call a huge new attack surface, right? Just now the web that you've seen. Each of the line are potential attacks that can be conducted by groups or individual who essentially can control 51% of, for example, a crypto chain. And this group of miners can actually control the hash, right, and manage the network, right, manage the power, etc., and start to conduct the same kind of threats to you that you're experiencing in Web 2, your ransomware, right, as well as phishing, right, as well as many other, or perhaps even insider threats, right, phishing into your staff, enticing them to want to basically collect data through their identity to pass it to them, right? So again, there are smart contracts that are getting hacked as well. And all these are creating new attack surface, right? So again, new technology is secure because it hasn't been hacked yet. It's really a huge mistake, right? So constantly there are new technologies that has not been fully proved, right? And that not fully proved is what I call the residual risk, right? It's not that the vendor or the technology is no good. It's just the way of attack has gotten a lot more complex, right? So ignoring this would potentially expose your business and your client to a lot of problems. So being a risk manager, sitting down and ask, what can go wrong, right? When say we are adopting a blockchain, right? And that there is X amount of ownership, right? And what can go wrong with that kind of ownership? And then you can identify some of this risk at a very early stage and put in place control to manage it. Controls like what? And like the least authority and a zero trust framework. All right. So some of the factors also talking about reputation risk that can help to build up or even crumple you down. These are some of the top 5 factors of corporate reputation that potentially can be hit. Typically, if you are to offer something on the Web3, you involve your product or services quality. It also involves your employees' quality, how productive they are. It also involves your customer service, how are your customers being served, right? And it also involves how safe is your product. Would buying your product or your service resulted in your customer's vulnerability, where someone else attacked through your product, your vulnerabilities, and attack them, right? This is what we call vendor risk. So even if a company is fully proofed by a fortress, you still need to eat, sleep, right? And purchase things that is essential as a cost for your organization to run. All these are potential vulnerabilities that your product or services, if it's not safe, will be brought along into your customer space. And of course, last but not least, the respect for customers or employee privacy has been an ongoing topic in the space of Web3 as well as AI, right? So I'd like to show example here. You can see that Temasek, in the FTX case, right? It wasn't so much about FTX being, putting people into bankruptcy or losing people's wealth, or the founder sort of swindle people, but it was the reputation damage that was on some of the capital investors, right? Players like Temasek, right? You can see how DPM Lawrence Wong has to come out and manage, right? Has to put out a statement to manage and to encourage the importance of responsibility while we are innovating. All right. So it is this sort of reputation damage that can be irreversible, if I may use the word, right, at a certain point in time, because that impression has been put into your customers, your citizens, your community. It really takes many good deeds to build a good reputation, but you really only need one bad one to lose it, from Benjamin Franklin, right? So this is a pure, very true statement that is relating to this example that I'm sharing. Now, some of you guys might now be keen on, hey, Andy, then what are some of the regulations, some of the legal frameworks that we can embark on? Again, unfortunately, this is still very early stage, like I mentioned, the space of Web3. In fact, we are only very close to managing online payment, right, through the Payment Service Act that MAS has come up with, right? That is like trying to manage, in a sense, crypto coins or cryptocurrency is being seen as a currency that needs to be regulated, because there could be potential anti-money laundering or counter-terrorism kind of activities, right, happening using cryptocurrency. So MAS has put forward this to manage how the currency is being used, right? So if you're paying someone or you're transferring cryptocurrency, right, now you can't say that it is not eligible to AML and CFT, right? So you're being watched when you're doing that, right? It can be considered as laundering. So some of that's only one part. The technology side, there's so much more, right? So it has not caught up with the technology, essentially. So challenges that exist in regulation for this emerging tech is that there's an inconsistent legal treatment. We have seen that in US, where they're trying to create regulations to basically manage and control the Web3, or even in peer-to-peer file sharing, right? It's also unclear at what point an entity can be participating, would be deemed as acting as a business subject to the regulation. Because remember, Web3 is decentralizing. It goes down to the user. So when is the user representing himself as a user or representing as a business subject, right? So I just put in an example here. If someone is to conduct thousands of crypto transactions per day, at what point do they switch from being a user to an exchanger, right? User to a business? It's unclear, right? So you can see the lack of clear guideline for these transactions has put a lot of risk on unintended criminal activities, right? So someone may be passing millions of cryptocurrency, but his intention was not to launder. But unfortunately, this was seen as a criminal activity. Can you see that? So this has not been really clearly classified at this point in time, right? And regulatory authorities has attempted to apply traditional legal principle, but it failed, right? Because the technology is just moving way too fast for Web3 and even the metaverse, right? So you can see even in US, they were trying to pass down bills, pass down executive orders. The internal public sector agencies and ministry are finding it hard to execute, to enforce, or even to prosecute digital asset transactions, right? So again, you can see here the example of FTC was filing a complaint against a medical testing lab, right? They alleged that the country failed to responsibly protect the security of consumer personal data, including medical information. Now, is medical information a digital asset, right? So again, you can see they are really trying to balance between, or in fact, it's not really balancing well because the technology is putting a very heavy weight on one end of the balance, while the regulation is really not moving as fast. Does that present an opportunity? Yes, of course. But does that also present a type of risk? Yes, as well. And you can see here, we are talking about a risk that potentially could harm humans, right? So for those who are wondering what kind of technology risk we should start off with, right? So you can see this is just a list of 13 steps or 13 areas that you should look at when it comes to technology risk, right? And these are basically from Technology Risk Management Guideline that has been shared by MAS. And these are some of the guidelines that are essentially huge, right? It's a topic on its own is huge. And without doing that, you can see how people gets affected, gets hit, right? So this example is a Tesla model crash, killing 2 men, right? So AI itself do not have something that is well governed, and itself as a technology presents risk even at human level, right? So that's something even in regions like Europe, right? They're exploring like AI audits, right? To help to put in place certain form of checks to ensure that technologies are not deviating from the risk they are appetizing on. Coming to the last few slides, right, ladies and gentlemen, how can we prepare ourselves today? I hope this session has been useful. I encourage everyone to adopt a risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking is really about what can go wrong when we are taking on this initiative. What can go wrong when we give something to someone? What can go wrong when we accept something from someone? All right. And you coordinate this effort through continuous managing and evaluating risk. So the key word here is risk is a continuous effort. It's not a one-time effort when you're embarking onto a new Web3 initiatives in your business. Even if you outsource this to someone to help you to do, it itself is a risk. What can go wrong by having this vendor helping me to build my Web3 protocol? What should they be providing me on a regular basis to update me, to report and document, right? So you can see these are some of the way of thinking to help you to manage. And leadership needs to support. This is not something at ground level we can decide, right? A Web3 ecosystem needs to progress with leadership, commitment, and accountability, and participation into the community. Always understand that the maximum risk appetite you are willing to go when you're embarking on Web3 initiatives. There's no such thing as you will not lose something. You will, right? So accept that and start to identify that. And of course, you always heard about people, process, technology. In Web3, we have one more layer called the protocol, right? So the protocol area is really a new area of understanding one needs to be aware of. And typically, these are highly technical. And not knowing is a risk because you do not know what can go wrong in the protocol layer. And that's where people will actually engage auditors to do penetration tests and audits on this protocol space. And with that, I would like to end off helping everyone to understand how you can get started with a successful, for example, cybersecurity implementation in Web3. The principle here that I'm showing you It's actually one of the clause 4 in ISO 31000. It talks about how you create value and protect value through harnessing Web3, right? So you can see there are 8 different areas of focus. And these 8 different areas of focus can be translated into how you conduct assessment, setting goals, choosing technology through the best available information, creating a framework based on your appetite, review the policy, making sure that this policy has a proper risk plan, right? And when you're executing, you have this evaluation being done to feedback to the risk plan to enhance it, right? So this is what I will end off with. These 8 steps is not something that you could do it just like this, right? I would love to say work with the team. If anyone is interested, feel free to get connected. We can always explore how we can work together on this. So with that, I will hand over to Sean for the remaining Q&A sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andeed. And it's really, really good insight and pointers around, managing risk that requires the commitment of the leadership, a great community effort, and more importantly, risk management being a continuous effort. With that being said, we have got a couple of questions coming in from there.
Sure.
The biggest one here would be Andeed, how can companies proactively manage their reputation in this, decentralized and open environment per se?
Yes. Yep. Good question there. So I bring you guys back to the risk principle once again. All right. You see, being a risk manager, we are very disciplined, right? We always have the beginning in mind and the end in mind. And by having that questions about reputation risk, we always ask ourselves what originally were our objectives, right? And how was that objectives translated into the principle, right? So the principle could mean that we would like to have exposure to be kept within Singapore. Okay, can you see that? It can be, I'm just doing something very simplistic so that you can understand that, hey, but principle can be a lot broader, can be a lot more bold. But if you are containing, let's say, within Singapore, the framework that you'll be doing will be aligning to Singapore regulations, for example, right? And you also do communication within this space, right? And you will meet people, you interact with people in this space, right? So that you manage their expectation, telling them what can go wrong and work with us, right? And this is what we call consulting, right? So, and with that, you can essentially manage your reputation and even become a leader in that space that you intend to go to. So when you're managing reputation risk, you could create a reputation for yourself as well. So like I mentioned, it's an opportunity and a threat. So if you see that as a threat, find a way to turn it into an opportunity. And turning it into an opportunity is simply by being very clear, right, in managing the risk. Yep, hopefully that example helps to address that question, even though there could be more. Reputation is a big topic.
That's good stuff. That's really good stuff. Another quick question with reference to managing reputation and risk management here would be, could you discuss a bit more about your experience as a cloud business and risk management leader for these major technology companies or companies who are looking to pivot themselves into the Web3 space?
I think there's always what we call strengths and weaknesses within organization. There are companies that are built to get towards some of these spaces. Example, let's say if you talk about ByteDance, right? They are like the China Google, right? They continuously innovating themselves, creating new products. They're essentially an engineering and product organization, as compared to, say, a company like ServiceNow, which is more of a service company, right? Creating a tool to help to focus on services, right? So you can see these two organizations would have very, very different ideas and adoption of Web3. In fact, while I'm talking about this, companies like ServiceNow already are working on AI-related projects, right, into their ecosystem. So would that bring them into the Web3 space in the future? Most likely, right? But the question is, what is their organization focus? Again, what's the kind of risk they're willing to take, right? In order to embark on this Web3 space, it's very much driven by the leaders and how much risk they are willing to stomach.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Andeed. And due to a very quick short of time here, you can connect more with Andeed on our Swish app. And just as we're about to conclude, I'd like to remind everyone about this amazing giveaway. So if you sign up for the Swish app and complete your post-event feedback form, you will be eligible for a Taka voucher giveaway. This is one great opportunity for you to join our community and also connect with Andeed if you have further questions about identifying these technological risks and managing them for your businesses. So with that, thank you very much, Andeed, and thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you had a wonderful morning and learned so much about risk management. And catch you again for our next Spectrum and Web3. So with that, see you and have a great morning.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
You.